Welcome to the Riches from the Pages daily podcast. I'm Evangelist Adam Borden. And as we finish up the last several verses of Romans chapter 5, as we look into some of the greatest chapters in the Bible, I turn our attention to verse number 18 and 19. Now, we saw in previous verses that by one man sin came into the world, and then by one man the offense of death was wiped away by the righteousness of one man, by the gift of salvation through Jesus Christ. And so as we go forward, I want us to look at verse number 18 and 19 in this verse-by-verse study. The Bible says, "Therefore, as by the offense of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation, even so by the righteousness of one the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous." Now, I'm glad to know, and I'm sure if you're listening and you realize the price that had to be paid for your sin was taken by Christ, you're relieved and you're glad to know that the condemnation and the judgment for our sin was relieved by the righteousness of Christ under the justification by the free gift of His redeeming salvation. That's a great relief on the life of the believer. But notice this. I was just struck by this when I studied this earlier. It says there, by one man's disobedience, all who would be born after. It says many there. It says many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one man shall many be made righteous. That everyone who would be born because of one man's sin, everyone who would be born thereafter would have a sin nature. This is the thought that I just keep coming to in these two verses. Yes, I'm relieved that God through His Son has taken away the condemnation of our sin. But our sin affects others. Adam's singular sin affected all of creation in mankind. And our sin is not something that we can just excuse partially just because it's our sin and it doesn't really harm anybody else and it doesn't really hurt anybody else. But that's not the case. The influence of our sin impacts others. Habits are handed down. Attitudes and demeanors are acquired. Iniquities become ingrained. Negativity becomes natural. And the rejection of the things of God is regenerated in those who come behind and beside. You've heard it said 100 times. They're just like their daddy. You're just like your mama. You're just like your grandma and your grandpa. Well, that apple doesn't fall too far from the tree when it comes to sin. We all have a sin nature. But our sin, though Christ has dealt with it, does have an effect on others. It does have a negative impact on other people's lives. Let's think about that. You know, I've heard it said here recently many times, who we associate with today is who we will become in a matter of years, say 5 years. Your sin and my sin has a direct effect on the lives of those around us, like it or not. And so, sobering thought, but let's think on these things. And tomorrow, we'll search for more riches from the pages of God's Word. And you can find out more about us at evangelistadamborden.com.